Pastor James, thanks for being here.
John? What's up?
Oh my goodness. You're looking great, by the way. So
Hey.
fit, so fit.
Thanks, bro.
What's the secret? What's the secret hanyak you're taking?
Trying to.
Some secret hanyak.
Dude, you got to have hanyak, man. That's the key, man. I'm telling you right now.
We all hated it, but now I drink it.
Oh, you have to, man.
I drink it now, man.
I believe in that stuff now. It's good. It's good.
Tell me about your nickname Scooter. Because when I came back, by the way, you were my old AWANA game commander.
Remember back then at Bethel?
At Bethel days. And we won, by the way.
We won.
We won AWANA Olympics.
It's all about, training.
You were so intense.
Dude, it's all about winning, bro. If you're not winning, you're not trying, bro.
Do you keep in touch with that group? Like Sam
I do.
Pack,
I still Sam Tomzik. I
Sam
keep in touch with Kathy Song.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I still remember
Irene.
You used to make us meet on Saturday mornings to practice for the Olympic Games, and then we won. We won.
That's why.
And I remember that's when it was at Young Knock. And I think it was like the first time we ever won. So we were so excited.
That's what I live for. I love AWANA Olympics.
So
I miss those days, man.
So intense.
It was so much fun with all the kids running around. Oh my, it was the best. Yeah.
And what's so funny is that I came to USC for my freshman year. And then I saw you and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my AWANA game commander. They're like, Pastor James. And I was like, oh, he's a pastor? What's going on? And so they said, oh, that's Scooter. And I was like, what's that Scooter? Where does that name come from?
So Scooter came from a friend of mine back in the college days. So I used to be this little guy that would try to go to every event, like every campus ministry, every social event, whatever it is. I would just fly once. Basically, it's another word for social butterfly. I was that guy. So my friends always said, like, your goal is to have everyone at UC Irvine get to know you, right? And that was kind of my goal. Like, that's what I did. That's why I just went around like a little scooter, just running around everywhere, trying to meet everybody.
So you went to UCI?
I did.
Okay.
I went to UCI.
And when you were at UCI, were you going to Bethel Church in Irvine?
No, I wasn't. I was actually helping out a small Korean church in LA.
What was it called?
I forgot the name of it, but I know the pastor. That's why. And so that was kind of my first gig. So I was helping out at OMC. I was helping out at Bethel with AWANA. And then I was helping out at church.
Were you in college?
While I was in college.
So when you were my AWANA game commander, you were in college?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so you and Sam Tomzik, I know he was in college too.
Yes.
Okay.
I was in college.
Okay.
I was my junior year in college. Yeah.
So you were not attending Bethel?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I was just helping out with Kathy.
Okay.
That's why.
From UCI, helping out the small church?
I'm sorry. I actually was graduating from college.
Okay.
So that's what it was. I was serving after college at this church, and I was helping out Kathy because Kathy was at Bethel at the time. Yes.
Okay. And so you're serving here, going to this church in LA, graduate UCI. Did you already know that you were going to go into pastoral ministry?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go to pastoral ministry before I went to college. So the thing was, my dad and I had an agreement. I wanted to go to Biola. But my dad said, there's no way you're going to Christian college.
Why was he so against that?
Because he wanted academics. He wanted me, UC.
What am I thinking? Yeah.
Typical Korean parent, right? So he thought I was just on some kind of spiritual high, didn't know anything in life. So you go to UCI. But if you still want to go to ministry, I will support you. So that's why I went to UC Irvine.
Okay.
And but I always wanted to go in the ministry at the time.
So right after UCI, is that when you went to Westminster?
Right after UCI.
Wow, you went right into it.
Right into it.
Okay.
Yeah, no holds bar.
And I had Harold on the podcast last week. He was in there before you. He was a little bit ahead of you.
No,
a couple
I'm
years.
ahead of him.
Okay, you're ahead of him.
I'm ahead of him.
You're first.
I'm first.
Harold and I think like Owen and these guys came after.
Owen is 1 year after, and Harold's actually 2 years after.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you guys all knew each other at Westminster.
Yes. Well, I actually knew Pastor Harold in high school.
Okay, tell me this story. How did you know him in high school?
So in high school, Harold and I went to Young Knock together. So I used to go to Friday nights in LA.
Okay.
On Friday. I only went on Friday nights. Harold always attended Young Knock his whole life.
Okay.
But I only went Friday nights. And the funny thing is, Pastor Ben Shin was actually the praise leader. The praise leader at Young Knock at that time. That's how I first met Ben.
Wait, he wasn't a pastor yet. He was just serving.
The praise leader. Serving as a praise leader. Praise leader at Young Knock. I'm not sure if he was a pastor, but I just remember him as a praise leader.
Okay, so he was leading worship for you guys.
He was leading worship back then. Yeah. Like he's the first guy I knew that actually led worship in English back in the day.
Wow.
Yes.
That's some history right there.
That's some history way back.
Wait, this is a college ministry or this is like young adults?
High school.
High school ministry.
High school.
Okay. So you're in high school.
I'm in high school.
He's in college or young adult leading worship.
Yeah, I don't know where he was, but I'll remember just Ben leading praise.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Okay. And was Harold in high school attending?
Harold in high school back then too.
Okay, so you guys knew each other since youth group days.
Yes, this is youth group days.
Man, that's some good
This
history
is how
right
far
there.
we go back. Yeah.
That's awesome. Owen was also attending Young Knock?
No, Owen was at a different church.
Okay.
So I met Owen in college.
Okay.
Yes.
So you go to Westminster. During your Westminster days, were you serving at a church as a Chonosanim or as a pastor somewhere?
I was.
Okay, what church was
I was
that?
serving at Emmanuel Mission Church.
In
as
LA?
a youth pastor, as a college pastor in LA.
Okay.
And I loved it.
You loved it?
I loved it.
Okay, so we're talking a lot here on this podcast about relationships between KM, EM, Korean first gen, Korean second gen. It's really surprising for me to hear this, that you say you loved it. Tell me why you loved it.
I loved it because of the fact that I loved the senior pastor, Reverend An. At the same time, we started a brand new English ministry under a gentleman named Reverend Steve Park.
What year was this? Do you remember?
This is 1993.
Okay, so this is part of the first wave then, part of that first wave of EMs.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, and the reason why I went there was because Emmanuel Mission Church just started as well, the KM side.
Okay.
Because they came out of OMC. So there was kind of a history there with OMC.
Yeah.
And so my mentor at Irvine, Reverend James Lee, was a huge influence in my life. And he was close friends with the senior pastor. And his closest friend was going to be the new English ministry pastor at Emmanuel Mission Church and we started a ministry called Emmanuel Chapel way back in the day.
And what was your role there when you were there?
So I was youth in college.
Okay.
Youth in college.
And during that time, were you, because it was a year after I got into USC, you were the campus staff at USC KCM?
So I was doing SC KCM and San Diego KCM at the time.
Okay. Both?
Time, yes,
okay.
Yes.
So you were serving when Jimmy was director?
Yes.
Okay. When he took over, yeah, because I was kind of being getting wave. Okay.
Yes.
And I remember I came in right after you left, and I was like, "Oh man, my AWANA game commander."
That's
so sad.
Yes.
How long were you at Emmanuel Church for?
So I was at Emmanuel from 1993 to 1990. I want to say 6.
Okay.
Yes, around there.
Now tell me why
97 around there.
Why did you love the KM pastor so much? Because that's also
because he's one of the godliest men I knew.
Okay, describe him
really
to me.
Really a humble, great teacher, brilliant man who just loved his people. Very soft-spoken, just embracing. And I love the older first generation at the church. The elders as well as the deacons were great men that I had a great relationship with. And so they just embraced me. They welcomed me. They allowed me to be who I am, which I thought was very freeing. And I absolutely enjoyed my whole experience there.
Okay, and so why did you not stay there? What happened when you were left there?
So the reason why I left, I would never have left Emmanuel Chapel. If I could have stayed there forever, I would have. But I had to get ordained. And in my denomination, the PCA, I had to attend a NAPARC church or a PCA church in order for my ordination. Because I was going to get ordained in the PCA. And so as a result of that, I had to leave Emmanuel Chapel, which absolutely broke my heart because I love the church and I will always be grateful for that church in my life.
What denomination was Emmanuel Church?
It was a non-denomination.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like a mission church denomination.
So where did you go after that?
So as a result of it, I went to First Presbyterian Church of Orange County.
Okay.
In Westminster, which was at the time either the largest or second largest KAPC church in LA.
It's still here?
It's still there.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what was your role there?
So I was going to be hired as an English ministry pastor there.
Okay.
So I was going to do EM.
Yeah.
And be the lead.
And then how long were you there for?
So I was there about 2.5, 3 years.
Okay. And then why did you move out of that church?
So the reason why at that time, I moved out of that church because I felt that I got betrayed by the senior pastor.
Okay, what happened there? Without, you have to share me all the details.
When I first went there and I got hired by the emeritus senior pastor, the godfather of the church, the founder of the church.
Okay.
And when I started, he was had to resign because, quote unquote, moral failure.
Oh, okay.
Whether that was true or not, it's debatable today.
Yeah.
But the assistant pastor became the new senior, and I was not his guy. So when I started there, I began to do everything. So I did English ministry. I began to do AWANA. I started taking a lot of different roles because of the fact that there's a transition going on. But I just wasn't his guy. And then 2 years later, I was on a short-term mission trip to Kazakhstan with our church members. And when I came back, they found my replacement behind my back.
You came back from the mission trip and they already hired someone.
They already have someone else in mind to hire to take my place.
That is wild.
After all that I did English ministry, I did children, I was doing basically everything for the English ministry there, for the church there.
You come back and did they tell you or did you just find out?
I just find out. Well, they kind of told me. That's how I found out. Yes.
What was your emotional makeup when you found out?
So I was completely shocked. I felt like betrayed. I felt like, I gave everything to this church and I was on the mission field doing work, and this is how they kind of repay me. And so it was not a very positive feeling. I was very hurt. I felt betrayed, and I was kind of angry at the time.
How did you do? Did you go to counseling or just talking with friends?
Just not knowing what to do. Pastor Ben Shin actually reached out to me. He hearing about the situation, knowing what I went through. He suggested that I take a break from ministry, from full-time ministry, and get a job. I was like, get a job? This is all I knew. I went from college to seminary to ministry. That was kind of the natural transition. I've been doing ministry for how long at this time? And I didn't even know, like, what am I going to do? He goes, I'll get you a banking job. I was like, a banking job? Like, I don't know anything about banking. And he actually got me a job at Evangelical Christian Credit Union. And I worked with a wonderful man named David Lee, and I love my experience there. I'm working as a sales rep on the school side, helping schools manage their tuition.
How long were you working there for?
So I was there for 2 years.
Okay.
As full-time. But then I ended up staying there almost 10 years as a part-time consultant for 8 more years. And I believe to this day that they did this to support my church plant when I planted the church 2 years later.
Oh, so you planted Redeemer? That's when you planted Redeemer?
Yes. Well, it was not after that. What happened was when I took my full-time job, I decided to still do part-time ministry. So I took out a part-time college ministry at Philadelphia Presbyterian Church.
Oh, that's right. You're at Philadelphia. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was at Philadelphia doing part-time. And that was also a very interesting experience because that church went through a major split.
What
happened?
Talk
about ugly. The senior pastor and the elders got into a major fight.
Oh,
literally
man.
Bodyguards, police were called, police were blocking off the entrance. Like, it was absolute chaos. And so the English ministry decided to follow the senior pastor. And we had an English ministry at the time. And after a little while, the English ministry pastor decided to take a call at the Billy Graham Center in Wheaton, Illinois. And so as a result of that, there was no one there. So I took on the EM role because I was a college guy. And then I was recently married, and I just felt like this was not healthy for my marriage. And about a couple months after that, or I forget how long, I decided to resign. And when I decided to resign, some of the members of the church asked me, hey, would you consider starting a church? I was like, I don't know how to start a church. But obviously, the Philadelphia situation with the KM fighting, my experience at First Presbyterian Church in Orange County was so negative. I said, you know what? Maybe I should need something different. Walk away from the Korean ministry and plant a church. And that's how Redeemer was born.
When we talk about the unfortunate incident that you experienced, that betrayal incident, and then now seeing this whole mess and fight at Philadelphia Church, does that make you kind of think, I'll never work with KM again? Does that kind of make you think like, oh, this KM EM thing will never work because of these 2 incidents?
I never thought KME would not work. So I decided, even though my denomination is an American denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America, the presbytery that I belong to in the denomination is still a Korean presbytery. And so I still feel allegiance and a loyalty to the first generation. I still feel like I'm that bridge. But I knew that for my place, though, I felt like I just could not work in that context again because of the experiences that I went through. And experiencing what I've experienced in my church, like the freedom and the fact of joy, I can do what I want to do, and understanding my culture a lot better, I felt like this is the best place for me at the time.
Last week, Harold talked a lot about grief, and we talked about some of his history. And as you know, our culture, we don't really deal with grief or low points in life very well. What we're taught is just to suppress everything. Just, there's a word chamo, right?
Yes.
Just hold it in.
Right.
And also our culture has to have this strong kind of image. So we don't want to show weakness. So when you went through those times, how do you think you kind of dealt with that grief? Or do you think that grief is still there? Like you haven't got fully healed from it?
I think for me is at the time, obviously Pastor Ben was a big mentor, right? Because of the fact that he helped me get a job. He helped me process. He allowed me to take a break from full-time ministry just to focus and to reflect and to think things through. And so that's how I was able to process things better because I had people speak into my life, Pastor Ben, my friends, as well as my wife at the time. At the same time, I was also beginning to think about whether or not I wanted to do ministry. So the job that I had, it was that I was able to support ministries So we were doing banking and lending for churches, schools, and ministries. Some of my clients were like World Vision, Compassion International. I was helping churches. And so for the very first time in my life, I asked myself, would it be better for me to go back into ministry or whether for me to be an elder in the church as a lay person, right? Because I love my job. It was a great job. But at the time, I felt like God still wanted me to do ministry. It was still a very early point in the Korean American church, and there was still a need for Korean American pastors. So I still felt like, you know what, I still need to do ministry. So my grief wasn't very deep. I was more probably angry. But I think by walking away from the ministry scene, from the Korean American ministry scene, it helped me to really think about, well, what can the church look like? And where can the church go?
You were kind of part of that kind of like initial wave of like EMs and kind of Korean American English speaking pastors. Even me, my youth pastor was like 1.5, you know, with the Korean accent. And so in those beginning days, everything was very brand new. Even KM, like this is all brand new to them. Jimmy was telling me that their kids were getting older and they were like, we don't even know what to do with them. And so what was that like kind of starting college ministry, youth ministry? You're kind of part of this first wave. You didn't really have predecessors. You didn't have mentors from Korean Americans. There weren't too many. How did you kind of figure it out? What were you doing during those times?
So it was a very unique time. We're all trying to figure out what would EM look like. But at the same time, I was excited to see the people that have gone before me and the work that they were doing. I felt like it's something that can be possible. And the reason why I say that is because understand that when my high school years, there was a parachurch ministry that had a big influence on me. That's where I first met Jimmy Han. So the parachurch ministry was a ministry called Walk by Faith by a gentleman named Reverend Howard Yim. And he would go around doing revivals and doing retreats, and he would gather young second generation Americans who didn't have a place at a Korean church, who did not really get a lot out of it. And he really ignited that fire. So a lot of the people that I met from that ministry were a big support at the time. And so when we were beginning to engage, we were all kind of in it together. And I think what helped me was my brothers in KCM. And so a lot of my mentors and my friends who were in KCM, we were all doing this together and learning from each other, supporting each other, helping each other. I think that what really made things exciting, at the same time encouraging as we're going forward at the time.
Who are those brothers? Who is that KCM crew that you're talking about?
So obviously it was like Jimmy Han at the time, and then my mentor, James Lee. And then we have Pastor Park from New Life Mission Church. And then we have Brian Kim, who was at New Song. And so it was a really exciting time. My friend Benson Kim was at Hope. So we were all doing this together, and we were all learning from each other. We're all supporting each other at the same time, trying to figure things out.
When you were serving at Bethel Church, when I was in elementary and you were with Sam Thompson, and then did you know any of the other like college or post-college people from Bethel? Or did you just know kind of like the AWANA people?
Just the AWANA people at the time. Yeah, that was kind of my crew.
Okay. So LA Yongnok was kind of one of the first churches to have English ministry. Pastor Ben always says that they were advanced. So they were kind of almost the model example. So was that kind of the it church to go to because they were kind of like the only ones and they were kind of doing really well and they're really large?
So at the time, there were actually a couple.
Okay.
There was OMC.
Okay.
And the interesting part about OMC and Yongnok, so Jim Bob was a big part of the OMC, of the Yongnok. And the senior pastor that's heading it right now was the first EM pastor at OMC.
Okay, I didn't know that's Daniel Nomok's right?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't know that.
Yes.
I knew he was an EM pastor, but he was at OMC?
He was at OMC. So that's how I remember him at OMC. That's how I first met him, was at OMC when he was the EM pastor at OMC back in the day. And there were original other ministries as well. There was Petra, that was in Orange County. That was way before your time as well.
Oh,
so there were ministries that were going on, and David Gibbons was about to start with New Song, right? And so there were exciting things was going, and anything that's new is exciting. And obviously, there was this pent-up demand because of the fact that we really didn't have English-speaking people that were able to move along the way. And especially for me in the Valley, not only do we have these influences, but another big influence in the Valley was John Kim and John Ko. Reverend John Kim and John Ko had a big influence where I grew up in the Valley. And they were wonderful speakers, godly men who really brought people together as well.
You're talking about John Kim, who went to Master Seminary?
Yes,
John Kim?
John
Okay.
Kim. Yeah.
So he's a little bit further than you. He's more
Yes,
older than you.
he's
Okay.
like, so I would say the godfathers of the Korean American church.
say it.
If I could write a history book in the Valley, would have to be Jimmy Han, Ben Shin, James Lee, and John Kim. These are the ones. And the reason why I say this is because they had an online campus ministry presence. They were really reaching out to the college ministry. And perhaps one of the OG is Reverend Bob O, right? At Petra, right? When he first started, Oikos, when he first started that ministry as well. So there were a lot of exciting things that were going on. And during the riots, when in college, right, Reverend Bob O actually spoke for the Korean American people during the riots. He actually spoke at an event. I remember going to that event. I was like, who is this guy? You know, who had a passion and it was a voice for the Korean generation.
When the LA riots were happening, like, was it a big deal within the Korean church to the point where you had to talk about it? Like the last year riots, it had to be addressed. We were all talking about when the LA riots were happening back in the 80s, were you guys talking about it from the pulpit? Were you addressing it with your congregation?
We were all talking about it.
Okay.
Right? We were all addressing the issue because of the fact that of what was happening to the Korean church, of the people, or our parents, you know, and how that would look. The anger, the grief, the sorrow. Just mitigating all of that at that time was very huge. And that's why, for example, again, Reverend Bob O was spoken. A lot of us went to that event to hear and to grieve and to mourn together as a people. So it was a huge event for the Korean church at that time.
You started to plant Redeemer Church. Mm-hmm. That in itself is actually very odd because Korean churches don't church plant that much. Right. We're doing it more now, but back in that day, you had to have been one of the first ones because that doesn't really happen that much that day. What were you thinking at that time? Because again, there's no other Korean church plants around. How did you figure that out? What were you doing? How were you processing that?
So my motto is, why not? Why not? And so it was actually a crazy experience, right? Because again, you're right. There were not a lot of churches that were actually planting at the time. But I think my experiences at Emmanuel Chapel, as well as working at the bank, I was able to interact with a lot of pastors, non-Korean pastors, gaining their wisdom, seeing how they were doing things in the ministry that enabled me to begin to do the work that I was doing. But ultimately, I would have to attribute to my training at Westminster Seminary that I felt like equipped me in order to do pastoral ministry and to begin the church itself. And what helped me, obviously, at the time when I planted the church was I had a full-time job. I was still working when I planted the church. And so I didn't have to worry about finances, you know, and it was exciting. It was brand new. And so it was a lot easier to attract people at the time in LA. And we started March 3rd, 2002 at the Garden Suites Hotel. And it was an exciting time. And I was grateful for the people that came that helped us start the church itself.
You know, I was church planting for like 2 years. I did it for 2 years. It was really hard. Probably the hardest 2 years of my life. I remember days when only one person showed up. I have these stories and a lot of people just kind of didn't want to get their hands dirty. So I had nice people. They were good people, but didn't want to wake up early to do setup and things like that. When you first started gathering as a core team, or I don't know if you met in your living room first, things like that, how were you trying to rally your people to say like, hey, we got to do setup, we got to do tear down, we got to do this, and we don't even know when we're going to get a building? What was your strategy?
So for me, it was a little bit different because of the fact, I remember that 20 people asked me, would you consider starting a church? They wanted to start
so you had the buy-in with 20 already.
Yeah, they already had the buy-in. They were done. And again, they saw what happened in that Korean church, the fighting, the screaming, the chaos, just to be honest, the ungodliness that was going on. And I think it turned them off tremendously, that they felt like, you know what, we need to be able to do this on our own. So that's why I already had the buy-in with the 20 people, that they're the ones who were motivated because, again, they left their families at the church in order to do this. So they were the ones who sacrificed. Whereas for me, it was like, I was going to resign, but they asked me to stay on to do this church plant itself.
You're doing the church plant and you're meeting at the hotel. From the hotel, where did you go to next?
So I was praying, God, if you want us to be in LA, you got to give us a facility. And Hancock Park Elementary School was the only school that allowed us, that would be willing to allow us to come on campus. And so that's where we began that's where we continued our ministry after a year at Garden Suites. And we've been at Hancock Park Elementary School for the past 19 years.
Really?
Yes.
Gosh, I didn't even know that.
Yes,
Okay.
and God provided a godly principal that gave us storage at the school, that allowed us to stay at the school for 19 years. And she just retired last year. And God has been faithful, and God has provided another principal that's been such a blessing to us that we've been able to stay there for all this time.
You have no plans on trying to get a building and trying to find a building?
As of not right now, I wish. If we had lots of money, I would take it. Yeah, if you want to sponsor this, we'll be more than willing to do this. Yes, for sure.
All right, people listening to this,
exactly.
Okay,
Pour in the money. Yes.
All right, I'll put the link to your church in description. Yes. Let's talk about school board here a little bit, because you did something exciting a couple of years back where you candidated, I don't know if that's the right word, for school board. And what's your exact position right now?
So I'm on the Torrance Unified School Board.
Okay.
As a school board trustee.
Why? Where did that come from? Why did you want to do that? Where is this passion coming from?
So 13 years ago, we planted our second site in Torrance, California. And the reason why we did that was because of the fact I felt like that I need to be able to minister to where I live. And so being in Hancock Park Elementary School is about 35, 40 minutes away from my home. And so I felt like it was really difficult for me to invite people to go from my home to my church. And so as a result of it, the mindset was to really be engaged in your community, to really be involved in your community. And so my wife and I have been very involved in our community, in our city. I helped start a nonprofit for my kids' elementary school at the public school. My wife was a teacher, a paraeducator at Torrance Unified. So my wife and I were very involved, whether it be teaching, coaching sports, whatever it may be. And as a result of it, some of the board members noticed me and they asked me, would you consider running for the Torrance Unified School Board?
Oh, so they asked you. Wow, that's awesome.
Yes.
What was that process like? Because clearly everyone knew that you were a pastor. And we know that right now, especially in education, a lot of heat and tension going on with Christian church and a lot of the ideology going on. So what was that like, knowing that they knew that about you? Right.
So when I actually ran on the ballot, you could put 2 words to describe you. 2 words. So I was going to put parent and pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that asked me to run, they said, don't put pastor. You will not get elected if you put pastor. But I was like, well, that's what I do. And so I decided, hey, if God wants me to do this role, then I'm going to put down pastor. And so I put down parent, pastor. And by God's grace, I got elected, which was a complete surprise to me. And so I think for me, it's allowing me to be able to be winsome and to be a witness to our community. And especially at the time, this was before COVID, things were very pleasant. Everyone were able to get along. But during COVID, obviously, the tension got a lot higher, especially with the whole political aspect of things, as well as the church's involvement. And so it made it more important for me to be even that much more winsome when I addressed the board or when we discussed these things. Even though I was passionate more on the conservative side, I had to be gracious and understanding so that I do not misrepresent Christ or even the church in the way that I conducted myself. Even though the public may not agree with my position, my approach mattered more to me than anything else.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I think a lot of Koreans have a hard time living out their faith in the workplace.
Right.
For you, I think it's even more sensitive because you're on a school board,
right,
which is not Christian, and you have to be elected and you get kicked out, things like that. So unpack that for me. How do you hold on to your Christian values within a very secular system that you have to kind of agree with like what they're teaching and stuff, even if it goes against what the
right.
Bible teaches? So how do you do that without compromising your faith or feeling like self-consciously like I've compromised my faith? How do you do that with good conscience?
Right. And that's where what your convictions are. Your foundational fundamentals that you cannot compromise with. At the same time, you recognize that you're only 1 out of 5, right? And even though I may be the most conservative on my board, I would never, ever rudely disparage my other board members, even though I did not disagree with them at all. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, they're human beings. And I fundamentally believe that they really wanted to do what was best for the students of our district. Even though we may disagree about what that best may look like or the approach, but I understood their heart. And so it was all about relationship building behind the scenes so that when we came before the public, that we would have one voice. So the people would see that we're actually unified, not united, but unified, right? That we come together as a unit, even though we may not agree. And so in the same way, I'm able to state my positions. As long as I didn't do it in a very coarse or mean or disparaging manner, that was very important to me at the time.
Do you ever feel that vibe that they're always like looking at you like, oh, he's the Christian. He's always going to bring up the Christian value.
Sure. There have been moments I've been attacked.
Really?
Yes. How can you as a Christian do this? How can you as a Christian say that? Whether it be from the conservative side or from the liberal side, right? You're getting attacked whatever position that you have. But my thing is I have to stand integrally before God. I have to stick with my convictions and be responsible before God one day. And I know I'm not perfect, right? But that's where the gospel comes and ministers to me, knowing that I may be flawed, but God still can use me in that situation. So it's been a very humbling experience for me.
Right now, other than like the medieval times or things like 500 years ago, I feel like our church today is being more attacked than ever, especially in our generation, just like in the last 30 years, something like that. So when you say people are attacking you, and right now I think a lot of people are getting attacked, and unfortunately these last 2 years, we haven't responded the right way. Everyone's just yelling, angry, lots and lots of name calling, things like that. How do you respond to people who are attacking you for your faith? What are you saying, or what's your emotional makeup? Or is there like a checklist you have in your mind? Like, don't say this, don't say that?
No, I think at the end of the day is love them. At the end of the day, people I was asked, they said, you're perfectly geared for the school board. Why? Because you know what it's like to be attacked as a pastor. You know how people criticize you. They discourage you. They say things about you. And at the same time, you've always taken it. You're taking it with a grain of salt. You still have loved them and embraced them. And so my thing is always love on people. At the end of the day of ministry, if I can say to anything, the most important thing is loving people. People get surprised even to this day when people leave my church. I still invite their children to come to our youth retreat, and they still come. Because my thing is, they leave. They have their reasons. Do I agree with the reasons to leave? No. Even though it's hard to love on them, I still need to love on their children, love them till the very end, right? And that's the thing. When you look at John 13, when you see Christ, it says Christ loved them till the very end. Even knowing when they were going to betray him, even though he knew that Judas was going to betray him, he loved them till the very end. And that's my motto. Love them till the very end, till the day I die, basically. There's no reason for me not to love, because at the end of the day, that's how Christ loved me. So when you ask me that question about when you get attacked and how do you deal with it? You know what? You smile and you say you understand and you just love on them. You say to them afterwards, hey, let's go get something to drink. Let's go get something to eat, just to build that relationship with them.
A mutual friend of ours, Jeff Kim, is also now on the school board in Irvine.
Yes.
And I know he was talking to you and getting advice and wisdom for you. What were some of the advice and wisdom that you were sharing with him?
I told him, you need to do this. Jeff is a great guy. He's a great administrator in his own district in Anaheim, and his heart is there. And I think that he could really be a great witness for the gospel, just like me, and that's what I want to encourage more people to go onto the school board. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I ran for the school board was because of the fact that a New Life pastor, Sam Yu, his wife, Sue Yu, was a board member at ABC. And so she was a pastor's wife who ran for the school. So I asked her, how hard is it? And she really encouraged me to run as well. And that's why I also encouraged Jeff, hey, this would be great. We need more people to be that voice, to be that sane and wise voice on the school board so that we can bring glory to God and really to love our community in that way.
I hear that for school board, one of the essential questions that they ask you is, it's almost like the first question is, what's your view on LGBTQ+?
Right.
So when you get asked that question, how do you respond in a way that's loving, holding on to biblical truth, but without kind of compromising, like I can still work together with you?
Right. And I think that's a very important question, right? One of the things about the LGBTQ is that this is a state policy. We cannot go against that state policy. No matter how much I may not agree with the LGBTQ movement or the party itself, I tell them that I cannot change the law, right? At the same time, we have to love this community too, These kids are going through their own issue, their own challenges, their own racism and discrimination by other students, bullying that goes on, right? And my job is to protect every student, regardless of your gender, your orientation, your religious beliefs, is that I need to be able to provide a very safe and protective environment for you. Because at the end of the day, my belief is that education is not the role of the state. We facilitate that role, but education begins at the home, right? And so for me, is to provide a safe environment for every student so that they can thrive and learn and succeed at every school. So that's why I always tell people that my job is to create that environment for them. Do I agree on their position? No. And I think people understand that. But I'm not going to lambast them and say no, but my thing is to really embrace them and to encourage them, to support them.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching the podcast. If you're finding value in this content, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, select all, or leave a comment down below. All 4 of these things help support our channel and help our content get out to more people. Okay, now back to the podcast. I had this really vivid memory of you when we were at Bethel, and it was a VBS. I was in 6th grade. Sam Thompson was our VBS leader. And then you were kind of like a co-leader for one day. And our class, we did this skit. Skit time is always fun, right? And I remember in the skit, my role was to be an evangelist. And I kept on saying, do you believe in the 10 Commandments? Do you believe in the 10 Commandments? And I remember afterwards, you came in because we were talking about just the day. And I remember you looked at me. I remember this very vividly. And you were like, when you said, do you believe in 10 Commandments? I don't think that's what Christianity and faith is about. And I remember in my head, I was thinking, man, this guy's so mean, Gosh, why is it? That's just a skit. And I remember you very specifically sharing with us, like, this is what the gospel is. It's not about 10 Commandments, not about rules. It's about Jesus. And as a 6th grader, I was just like, wow, why is he so strange? And then later on, when I was a seminary at Talbot, I don't know why. I think I was reading like some historical theology. That memory came into my head. And I thought about it. And I want you to know, I was like, man, you know what? I'm very thankful that you were serious about the gospel to a 6th grader, because I started as an elementary pastor. Maybe that's why, because I was doing elementary for 8 years. And I remember that memory came back and I was like, man, I'm so glad James was serious about the gospel with me, even though I didn't understand. And so I just want to say thank you for that. It's a very vivid memory for me when you're sharing that with me.
Your memory, so when I'm looking on listening to the past podcast, your memory is absolutely amazing, bro. Seriously, it's amazing how you remember things. That's your gift, man. Yeah. It's really a gift.
My wife, Hannah, says this to me. She's like, I don't get how you remember these things.
It's amazing, yeah.
I remember things like very, very well. I wish I had photographic memory, but it's kind of close. It's kind of close. So going back to this strong belief in the gospel, and I know you went to Westminster. Back around 2008 and 2009, I don't know if you remember this, but Gospel Coalition was just kind of starting, and this thing called gospel-centered preaching came out. And I don't know if you remember this, but around 2008 or 2009, there was this kind of like debate between what is real gospel-centered preaching. Right, yeah. And then here in SoCal, Southern California, there was also a division over that. This is what gospel-centered preaching is. No, it's not. This is what this is. And then started people to take sides, things like that. What is gospel-centered preaching to you? And I don't know if you remember that debate, but what do you remember about that debate?
So even at Westminster Seminary, right, so the difference was gospel-centered preaching and maybe more redemptive historical preaching. And then it got to eschatological preaching, at that point where you just could not even just do the linear, you had to do the vertical, right, the eschatological reality into it. So we used to have a lot of debates about what is gospel-centered preaching, right? And to me, it basically is a very simplistic thing, It really comes down to is not focusing upon the things that we do. It's not about man's works righteousness or man's ability or man's goodness or man's grace. It's about what Christ has done. It's all reflecting upon the very person and the very work of Jesus Christ, right? It's who he is, that everything that we centered in the preaching that we do always goes back to the cross and always goes back to Christ and what he did. From Genesis to Revelation, we believe it's a story of the redemption that is found in Jesus, right? So the old is the new concealed, and the new is the old revealed at the end of the day. That's why we believe there's unity, right? Whether you're preaching from Genesis or Revelation, it always got to go back to Christ and who he is and what he has done for you. And so you could people talk about many other aspects of that, like do we do application or do we do moralistic, no, it always goes back to what did Christ do and who he is, because that's what people need to hear, right? It's not about what I did, not about how bad I am. It's about all that Christ has done for me.
So you believe that in a sermon,
yes,
every sermon,
yes,
you got to bring in
Jesus
and Christ
has to be there.
Okay.
Yeah. You're not going to find Christ in every word. We're not saying that, right? But how does this text lead us to Christ? How does this text teach us about who Christ is and what he has done, right? And then how do we respond to that? I think you can do that. I have no problem with application. But the thing is, what is the crux of the message, right? Because the thing is, if you leave out Christ from that message, then can you preach that same sermon in a Muslim mosque and will that message still go across? That's the difference, right? That's why when you preach, is that, it has to be Christ-centered, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. So to me, the gospel is centered in Christ. So Christ-centered preaching to me is gospel-centered preaching in that way.
Yeah, that's what I believe. I believe that, the hermeneutic might be different, but that even though the text doesn't mention Jesus, from that text, very Spurgeon-esque, I got to make a beeline to the cross somehow and get there.
Yes. Or the implications of what tells about Christ.
Right.
Yes, for sure.
Talk about Reformed theology, because I'm kind of the black sheep. I'm a Southern Baptist.
You're good. We love the Baptists, bro. Yeah.
Okay, but Reformed theology and you Reformers, I feel like it's in a very exclusive group. Like you guys just want to hang out just as Reformed guys. That's my perspective. I feel like that's what it's like. Westminster comes out with a very strong Reformed-esque kind of persona, and this is the right way. Do you think my perspective is correct on this, or do you see that at all? Are you a little bit more open-handed?
See, for me, I'm a little bit different. So I love my non-Reformed brothers. And that's why when we talk about the history of the church, there's so many other avenues. I think a lot of times, even when we think about the Korean American church history, we always only focus on the conservative evangelicals. We would forget about our charismatic brothers who actually had a huge influence in the formation of the Korean American church. One of my closest friends, one of my groomsmen at my church, is a missionary for Southlands in China, Sung Chung, right? He's one of my groomsmen. And for me is that we are all brothers and sisters in Christ in that way. I think the reason why we have this tightness amongst our friends is because of the fact that we all went to school together. We all experienced a brotherhood at that time. And I sincerely believe for the guys that in my circles, in the Presbyterian Reformed circles, is that we were at a time at Westminster at a very special time. Remember, we were still that, you talk about the Korean American church. Well, how about the Korean American pastors in seminary at that time? So you have the first generation guys, and then you have us. So who do we hang out with? The white guys, or do we hang out with the Korean guys? So that was our kind of unique situation during that time as well. But we had our own identity. We had our own brotherhood at that time. At the same time, we also work in a very white denominations, right? Whether it be OPC, the CRC, the PCA. And so we had our own unique challenges finding our way through that as well. So I think that we created this brotherhood that was very tight in that way. And it's just generally natural. You associate with those who you spend time in your training experiences. It's like a football team, right? You get close to the brothers, right? Because you went through the trenches together. That's what you see when you come out of seminary as well. You see all the brothers getting close together. But as you go on in ministry, you tend to kind of loosen up. You're not as staunch as you want. I will not go to a sixth grader now and say, how can you do that? That's not the gospel, bro. I would not do that now. But that's what it was. You become more gracious. You become more loving as you get old. So that's what I've noticed. So, but I think that there is more of a willingness to really unite together. That's what the beautiful thing about Sola is, right? You see Baptists and Reformed people coming together to really encourage the local church in that way.
That's some good history there. I didn't even think about that. Like the fact that you guys were that first wave of Korean American English pastors. And so it makes sense that you guys kind of all found each other and stuck together. That brotherhood you guys have, though, that's a strong circle there. Like I always see these pictures on Facebook. It's like you, Alex, Harold, Owen. I forgot. There's these two other guys, but that's a very strong circle there. What does that circle mean to you?
It means everything. So one thing about pastoral ministry as you get older, the most important thing to me is, besides your family, is your friends. And these guys are my glue that keep me grounded and who speak into my life. In my 6th year in my ministry, Pastor Joel Kim actually called me and said, hey, I need to talk to you. I was like, okay, let's meet up. So we met up. He said, you know what? I'm a little worried about you. I said, why? He goes, well, I've been hearing things about you. I said, oh, like what? He goes, we've been hearing you've been speaking everywhere, like every conference, every youth retreat, everything. And Joel asked me a question. He said, James, are you dating your church or are you married to your church? In other words, he was asking me, how committed are you to your church? Oh, man, this is my 6th year at my plant. And I just felt, well, broken. And I was like, okay, I got to change at that time. You know, and I appreciate that. You have a friend that can speak into you and say, hey, we're worried about you. And so that's why it's absolutely huge of how these men have spoken into my life. And they take me away from the pressure. Man, we laugh together and just have fun together within our own circle. It's a very precious time. And at the same time, understanding that these men that I'm in this circle with, I'm the loser, right? These men are the studs, right? I'm the guy who is at a small local church, but I have the president of the Gospel Coalition, president of Westminster Seminary, president of M.Div. These guys are in the forefront. And I need to pray and support and encourage my brothers in that way. And that's why it's very exciting in our denomination to see the Korean American leadership that's rising up and to see how we're now being able to be that voice, especially even in our denomination as well.
You're not the loser, man. You're the most fit guy. Come on, man. Don't say that. Don't say that.
I always say that. We mess around, but we embrace each other. It's been a great experience. Yeah.
No, I love seeing those pics. It's a strong brotherhood there. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Here at the seminary, we're trying to do something that's never been done before. That's why I'm really excited. And even though I'm not in the Korean church anymore, I've always had a heart for KMEM. Kind of like you, the church I used to be at before Saddleback, I could have been there forever. I loved that church. I love that Moksa name. He teaches here as an adjunct. And we're trying to bring the KM pastor and the English-speaking pastors from the same church to the same school to not just do academics, but to build that healthy relationship. We're still hearing the same problems about KM and EM, first gen and second gen. When you hear about that idea, when you just think about that, what are some thoughts that come to mind?
So it's interesting because when I was 20 years ago, right, and when I was working in the KM situation, Korea was different back then, 20 years ago, right? And Korea is a lot more progressive, a lot more modern today. So I always thought back in the day that there may be a time where the 1.5 guys will be the new seniors. And these guys would understand because we went to school together. We experienced seminary together that would be more understanding, more gracious, more partner relationship oriented. And I think it's been surprising to me that I have not seen that. I thought we would be at a radically different place than we are here today, especially in the KM, EM dynamic itself. Because there have been so many surprises to me that I never thought would happen, but that are still occurring, especially in light of these new KM pastors who are younger than me, some of them, that I would thought that they would have been a little bit more visionary oriented about what the Korean American church can look like.
I think the same exact thing as you. And I also think that about EM pastors who are my friends, my age. We were the ones growing up in that. And now we're like head EM pastors. And I feel like not much really has changed. It feels like it's a little bit of the same thing to me. So when you think about that, what you just said right there, what are some changes that you think need to happen? What hasn't happened yet that you're kind of still waiting for?
So one of the new interesting things that are happening is that in the Chinese church, there is a local Chinese church that is they're going to do something very interesting very soon. Whether that happens or not, or how the people receive it will be interesting. But the Chinese Mandarin-speaking church is about to make the EM church the new senior pastor of that church.
Yeah, Hadley.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a buddy of mine.
That is a huge, huge transition.
Yes, right.
And I always felt the Korean church was ahead of the Chinese church here. Korean American church was ahead of the Chinese American church. But for that to happen is a huge statement. It's a huge statement about investment in the next generation to allow them to be the lead in order for things to take shape. And I believe that that can happen. And I believe it is slowly happening. For example, in our denomination, in our presbytery, we just recently nominated and elected our very first 1.5 second generation moderator. Will Ching was the first second generation moderator in the Orange County Presbytery. So imagine these English-speaking guys leading these Korean presbyteries. And I think that's a huge statement to recognize the leadership and the abilities of our second generation Korean Americans. So that's what gives me hope that these relationships can foster and they can grow. And I think that that's what we need to see a little bit more of is the ability to see these kind of partnerships being different today. Rather than doing the old pattern, we just doing it over and over again, is to think something outside of the box and do something new by maybe allowing the first, second generation to be the lead. And the first generation always supported the second generation. But that would be the ultimate support. To say, we'll still support you, but yet you could be the lead. It's one thing to say, we'll support you, and you still have to be beneath us. But it's another thing to say, we'll support you, and yet you'll be the lead. And to me, that will be the greatest transition. And I think I'm hoping for that day. I think that day can come, I think. But it may take some more time at this time.
A lot of what you just said and what we just talked about before that has to do with leadership development. I always felt like I wasn't developed. There are things that about me, my skill set, wheelhouse, that wasn't tapped into. And I think what happened to me, which I still think is still happening today, is I'm the head guy. Just do it like how I tell you to do it. Just preach, take care of the ministry, and that's it. Don't get too wild here. It's a very tamed type of ministry. Now, again, I think part of the reason why, my friends are now EM pastors like that hasn't changed because there wasn't enough leadership development for us. And Jimmy Han and I talked about this where it makes sense for you guys because the Korean speaking pastors, they don't know what to do with you guys. But what unfortunately happened was this pattern happened. Now you guys are all the head guys and we haven't broke that pattern yet. How do you develop the young guys at your church?
And I'm sure Pastor Ben would be a big part of this, but it's mentorship. It's really coaching the next generation. One of the things I realize now being a senior pastor myself, by myself, there's no KM, right? Is that a part of me had to repent to the first generation. My criticisms, my back in the day, my way I view them, the way I saw them. And the reason why is because until you're the senior, you don't realize the pressure and you don't realize how much feel this demand to make things work, right? And I always thought, these guys were control freaks. I always felt like these guys were always about them. They're always about their way or the highway. But when you're the lead guy and basically like there's no other support, you have to make this work. How many of us would really be able to delegate to someone else? How many of us would really be able to let control? How many of us would really be able to say, hey, you go with it, right? When you feel like it's out of my hands. And I think that's what it's hard. And I think that's why now, as for many of us who are now senior pastors, that we can really speak into the lives of the new EM pastors and how they can relate with the senior pastor by understanding. You have to understand what they're going through, understand the pressure that they have to deal with, who they're accountable to, right? And because of it, they have to make decisions you may not agree with, but there is a reason why they have to make those decisions. So I think mentorship and coaching is a big part of how we can develop the next generation of American leaders.
What are like specific things that you do in your coaching and mentorship with your younger pastors at your church?
So my younger pastors, I think, is to show them a different side of ministry. And so, like office hours or like, all these other things, It's what I want them to really do is to enjoy ministry and just to really focus on the people of our church. So it's really modeling for them, what ministry can look like, I think, for me. So whenever we have our leaders meeting every Wednesday, it's just sharing life on life, me speaking into their lives, me sharing my experiences of why we do what we do, or just because it's different from what I learned when I was growing up, you know, and my ministry experiences, you know. And so that's why I feel like I can really speak into their life and ultimately model for them. Is the best way for these men to learn is to see how I do things and how that affects the church so that they can learn from it, right? And they can ask questions saying, hey, why did you do that? And I noticed that that's been the result so that we can have dialogue and we can talk about what is the best way.
Do you ever think how like with social media and all the stuff that you're like kind of starting to get to that point where you're like, man, I don't get how this generation works?
Oh, dude, so, you know, the funny thing is I always tell people I hate teaching my mom how to use the iPhone, right? And then the other day I had to ask my kids, how do I use Instagram better? How do I use Instagram? How do you do this? And I felt like so dumb. I felt like, what in the world is going on? Yeah, for sure. But social media is huge.
Huge.
You know, huge. And that's a big reason why I think I got elected was because of my uses of social media.
I mean, that's how Gen Z communicates.
Yes.
I always tell churches, if you're not on social media, your church doesn't exist.
Yes.
To us, it does. But to Gen Z, you don't exist. You're what is that church? No one looks up stuff on the website. They just search on social media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not only that, you have to be on top of it, you know, because it changes so fast.
Right.
Technology changes so fast, right? And you have to understand the language of what the next generation is going through. So one of the things, even for me, one of the things I always tell people is that as a minister, humility is the best key, right? It's always the best key.
So good.
And so one of the things I'm learning is, I think when I was at a session and somebody was talking about how we all need mentors, right? So often when we think about mentors, we think of someone older. But they said, you know what? Maybe you need someone younger to mentor you.
Wow.
And it's true. I need younger people to mentor me about the voice, the communication today of what Gen Z, even after that generation, is going through so that I understand that unique culture. You know, how do they say? Because you know what? The way I speak today, maybe still like 20 years ago. And I got to learn to adjust so that I can be able to speak in a way that would resonate with this next generation, or I will lose that generation. Absolutely. So I agree with that so much. Yeah.
In our culture, because it's built off a hierarchy, and again, just the way this whole English ministry started, it was very beginning days, and we were always very respectful. Now that you're a senior pastor and your friends are all senior pastors, do you get scared that maybe some of the young guys might like be better preachers than you or get better than you? And so you get kind of scared that, oh, what if they like them more than me because I'm the senior guy?
No, I know they're better than me. Oh, yeah, for sure. I already know they're better than me and embrace it. You know, it is time for us, my age group, is to be able to pass on the baton. And so I'm waiting for the 30-year-olds and the 20-year-olds to rise up and the 40-year-olds. So I have some theories about things, right? And so, so we have a gap. You know, for some reason, we lost a lot of the 30s. Pastoral candidates, people in ministry. But I think the reason why of that is because they're the ones who experienced the Great Recession the most. And so I had a younger person who spoke into my life, and he said, you know, so often the first generation, it's that you guys criticize the generation about they're so money focused. You know, all you guys care about is money, how much I get paid, you know. But he said to me, did you ever ask a question why they're so money focused? I said, well, maybe they're greedy. He said, no. You got to understand, when these guys came out of seminary, there was no jobs for them. 2007, 2008 is when these guys came out of seminary, and the Great Recession hit. So a lot of these guys who had college degrees and master's degrees couldn't get a job. They were working as security guards. So understand the PTSD that they went through with this financial insecurity, that's why for them it has become that much more important. And I was like, whoa, mind blown. Like, that could definitely be a reason why they have a different attitude toward money than I do, right? And I was, again, learning from that generation, you know, and allowing them to speak into my life to have a greater understanding, right? I think that's what it is I think what I've learned from the podcast that you've done is, I think Ruben as well, I think as Ben was talking about, having that missionary mindset, understanding the cultural values of the other side and learning to adapt, understanding why that value, you may not agree with that value, but understanding that value and working with that. I thought that was absolutely correct and brilliant. I thought they did a very good job explaining that in that way.
You said that there are certain things you thought about KM when you were like 20 years ago. What were those thoughts? Like, what did you think about KM when you were first kind of going to those churches 20 years ago?
You know, I really appreciate them. I really appreciate their sacrifice, their heart, and I appreciate all that they have done. I thought they would never let go of the control. I never thought that they would ever release us to allow us to be free and to be on our own. And that's what I always thought. And that's why it was always hard for me. The question was for me, can I live underneath that authority? It's too hard to have two authority figures in one house, you know? And I think that's where something is going to have to go sooner or later at that point.
What do you think? I always ask this to all my guests on the podcast. What do you think Korean Americans, second gen, can learn from the KM first gen side?
Sacrifice. Yeah. Resolve, sacrifice, commitment, passion. They're so passionate. That's what I realized. They're so passionate and sacrificial. They are all in. And that's something that we as second generation, we just don't know what that looks like. You know, they're willing to live up they're willing to sacrifice their standard of living for the sake of the ministry, right? And so it's just different today. You know, for example, I always wanted to ask, how many KM pastors' wives work? Would you say it's 50%, 20%? I'd be kind of curious to see. Whereas for second generation, I would say it's a good 80% now, you know? And that's a huge different dynamic, right? When you have your wife work, right? But for them, they were willing to sacrifice that because you know what? We'll sacrifice that other income so that we can focus on ministry, so that the wife can stay home, take care of the family, so I can just focus on ministry. That's hardcore. That's just another level. Those are the things I feel like that we can learn from the first generation, their commitment, their passion, their sacrifice, and their no nonsense when it comes to those things. And also their discipline, their Christian discipline. Now you could talk about, you know, it's like moralistic or like it's all about works righteousness, but no, I really think they're very disciplined in their spiritual disciplines. And you have to applaud them for that. That's why they're prayer people. And I think that's something that we can always learn from them in that way.
What about the flip? What do you think KM can learn from EM, Korean Americans?
We're visionaries. We're creative, and we understand our culture. That's the thing. We live in a unique culture, and we understand that culture, that we have a pulse of what is going on in our generation today. I think that we also can appreciate our life balance. I think it's healthier. Whether they disagree or not, I think that healthier balance, right, is God first, you know, family second, and then ministry, you know. I think that's a very important thing. And I think that's why for me, you know, my family is very important to me. I want to make sure that my kids have a father who is a father first, right? And hopefully the way I live my life will be to influence the way that they live their life in that way. So I think that that's something that they can learn from us in that way.
So you got 3 kids. You have a son who's a freshman. Unfortunately, at UCLA, because I went to USC.
SC had a brutal loss, bro. They had a brutal loss, man.
Hey, Utah had good defense.
Brutal. That was brutal.
Yeah,
brutal.
Great defense, man. So he's at UCLA, and then you have a 2 more. Yes. What grades and ages are they?
They're a junior and a freshman in high school.
In high school,
yes.
Okay. And then what was the makeup again? It was a
boy, girl, boy.
Boy, girl, boy. Yes. Okay, so I got 3 too.
Yes.
I have a boy and then 2 girls.
Yes.
What's it like now having your first son in college,
it's
and now
fantastic.
You got teenage in high school?
So I always tell people, man, you think your kid goes to college, that you're out of sight, out of mind? Heck no, man. They're still on your mind. They're calling you, texting you, whining, complaining about how miserable life is, you know? And so things don't change in that way. But I think what I've learned also through my kids too, something to think about since you're doing this second generation, first generation thing, you need to begin to think about the third generation. So that's another factor.
Sure.
So in our denomination, we just recently ordained our first third generation Korean American. Third generation Korean American got ordained.
How old is he?
So he's 26.
Wow.
Right. And so he's now serving in Oregon. So third generation Korean American. And the reason why I still feel like I'm still that bridge is because I've learned something through my children. So it's very interesting to see my children's friends. Right. So if I were to ask you, my kids are second. So I'm second generation, third generation. So imagine my kids' friends. Right. They're Korean friends. What generation do you think they are?
I don't even know. Yeah.
Right? So a lot of them are actually second generation.
Okay.
And some of them are third generation. So my kids, when they go to their friend's house, they say, oh, Dad, I felt like I went to Harmony's house, right? That's different
because their parents were still, they just immigrated. So
yes.
they're, okay, I get what you're saying.
So that's why that dynamic is interesting there too, right? Because my kids are still interacting with kids whose parents immigrated.
Right.
And so that divide is still not clean on the third generation. So there's a still strong Korean influence on this third generation because of the people that they associate with as well. Right. So that's why it's very interesting to me when I go to the campuses, when I go to these KCMs on USC and UCLA, that some of them are still second generation and some are third generation. And that the way they interact is going to be radically different. Right. And the types of church. But the reality is because they still interact together, they're still going to Korean American churches. So even the third generation are still going to a Korean American church today. Now, I don't know how many overall. I don't know what the statistic looks like, but it'll be interesting to see at what point will you see a bigger withdrawal will be the fourth generation from their Korean American church. This is why the Korean American church, this is why what you're doing is very important, right? To kind of establish what is the future going to look like for the Korean American church, right? I'm no longer in that setting, right? I planted a church, even though majority of my church is Korean Americans. But it's going to be radically different in the next 10 years as we continue to navigate these things. Yeah.
That's really interesting you say that because I'm actually very scared about third generation, especially in the Korean family, because they're growing up in youth group very different from how we grew up in youth group. There's no like Friday night Bible study anymore because there's sports and there's dances. A lot of the second gen parents, church is not kind of committed, like the way our parents forced us to go to church. Everything is a little bit more loose. You know, Steve Shang, I think he wrote his dissertation, his demon on this, on the Korean American third gen. I'm really interested in reading that. But I'm very, very afraid of our third gen kids because they're not growing up in church the way we do.
Right.
What do you think about that?
So that's why earlier you asked a question about the Reformed heritage, right? This is why even now I believe in covenantal worship more than ever before. So for one of the things for our church, at our church, is that our middle school and high school kids join us for worship.
Every Sunday.
Every Sunday, our junior high school and high school kids join us for worship. Our elementary are still dismissed at halfway, right before the sermon. But once a month, they also join us. So because we do a whole church-wide during Community Sunday, right? But the reason why I say that is because I believe that the greatest influence on a child's life are the people that model before them.
Right. I agree.
And so before that, and the reason why is because if your church really is a connected family, you know, these children see the other kids' parents. They see the people that are around them, how they worship, that really influences the way that they worship in their own life. That to me is absolutely huge. And that's the thing. Our kids get closer to other kids when they know that their parents are close to their parents. So that influence is absolutely strong in a kid's life. So that's why I really sincerely believe that the best way we can do for our children is to really model what worship ought to look like in the church, right? That's what we need to do for our children. One of the biggest blessings to me so far this year has been that my son, going to UCLA, still comes to our church. And we're not the big, college church, but for him, he still loves the church, and I will always be grateful for that. That's his home, but whether he stays or not, he might change later on. I don't know. And I left that flexibility to him. My thing is I allow him to fly and be that young adult that you want to be, but his own volition has been to come back for now in that way. But I think that's what it is that we need to be able to model for our children. And the beautiful thing is, KCM is still a part of our lives. I still speak at KCM after 30 years, right?
That's awesome.
And my hope is the parents that went to KCM with us, now their kids are in college.
Oh man, that's
right?
wild.
That's wild, right? That's wild. It's amazing when I go to UCLA and SC and I say, dude, I know your parents, bro. I know your parents. Like, it's the weirdest thing. I take pictures. I take selfies with them and I say, hey, guess what I just saw? But the reason why they show up at these campus ministries is because their parents say to them, hey, check out KCM, right? Whether they had a strong church experience or not, they still tell their kids, you got to check out KCM. To me, that's huge, right? That's where, like the legacy of KCM still continues on, right? We pass on to generation.
We're in a very interesting time right now where a Korean American, Julius Kim, is the president of Gospel Coalition. Another Korean American, Joel Kim, is now the president of Westminster. These are huge. By the way, Julius Kim was my elementary pastor.
Oh my.
So when I first saw him at this, it was like a West Coast Gospel Coalition thing. I saw him and I told him that. I said, you were my elementary pastor at Bethel Church. And
he's like, I screwed up. I screwed up. No, I'm just kidding.
And when I saw that he's the president of Gospel Coalition, for a teenager seeing that, that's awesome. Because when we were all growing up, there was no Koreans in those big roles, right? We were all still looking at John Piper and these guys. What does that mean to you? What does that mean for us? We're seeing our people now kind of getting to these roles, which is something it's kind of hard to process.
It's awesome. It really is awesome. And I think that's why there's so much hope for the next generation. Our young people need to see people like them before them in these positions so that they can begin to dream of what they can accomplish or what they can do. It's amazing to see today the number of amount of Korean Americans who are taking up evangelical leadership roles, right? Like our brother Julius Kim, our brother Lloyd Kim, our brother M.Div, as well as Joel Kim. We also have Michael, who is now going to be the president of Lausanne, right? And so you have these guys leading the next generation, and I think for younger people to see that, they feel like the sky is the limit for them in that way. And also, they also speak and do a lot for the Korean American church still. What Pastor Joel and what Joel and Julius do for the Korean American church is absolutely huge by encouraging them, to continue to speak for them in their own ways.
Being part of that first wave, seeing younger pastors in their 20s, kind of starting out in ministry, no matter what role it is, what is some wisdom you would bestow onto them, thinking about how they're learning about pastoral ministry, learning about church, and even learning about themselves? I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
We don't really know ourselves very well. No one trained us in our skill sets. We don't really know our spiritual gifts. Yeah. We think we have to preach, but I'm like, you don't have to be a good preacher. You could use ministry in other ways. So what is some wisdom you would show to some 30s, 20s guys?
So especially for those who are in seminary now, I would say to them, study. Don't sacrifice your 40 years for the sake of these 4. Invest in these 4 years for the next 40 years of your life. Study. Because to me, I feel like the reason why I'm still around today is because of what I learned in my seminary years in that way. Second is to take on different roles. I think my concern today is a lot of the second generation Americans don't want to do children's ministry. They don't want to do youth ministry. They just want to do EM. They want to do young adult. They want to do college. But I think there's something about learning in the trenches that you learn, you deepen your faith, you deepen your resolve, you learn about commitment, you learn about overcoming hardship. There are lessons learned when you are in an uncomfortable place that would add value into your growth, right? And I think that's what it is. My thing always is, if you cannot preach the gospel to children and to youth, you will never be able to preach the gospel to adults.
Yep.
Right. And so, because you always have to be creative to speak to this generation, right? In the same way, as you get older, you got to figure out how you're going to speak into the next generation. So the same way, I encourage young people, as you study, to find a position where you can do youth ministry, where you can do children's ministry, and hopefully you will have a support. I think that's what's the hardest part. Right? They don't feel like they have that support, right? Where they're so burnt out. But that's why is to find a network of friends. So that's the third thing. It's not only do ministry, youth ministry, children, but the third thing is to make good friends, lasting friendships that you can cry with, pray with, encourage with during this time. I think that's my biggest concern. That's why when I look back, what did I learn? I learned the most from my youth and elementary years, right? I learned the most from my seminary, and I met my best friends forever during that time, my 20s, 30s years, forever. And that's what I remember the most. That's what I encourage these guys to really invest in one another.
That brotherhood is strong.
It's absolutely huge. Yeah.
What is your wife's role in all of this? How has she helped? How has she given you wisdom? This Hamonim role is very different from KM first gen to second gen. And so Does she feel like she has to be like serving in church all day and like making the pop and stuff like that? Or is she a little bit more laid back? Or is she more of like just speaking wisdom into your life? What is her role in your ministry?
She just tells me you're not all that, basically. You're just a loser. You're not all that. Okay, that's good. That's her
brings us back to earth.
She brings back, no. But in reality, at the beginning of our ministry, she was very hands-on. When we first started the church, the early planning of the years of the church.
Well, that's first planning. That makes sense.
That's what it was. She was all hands-on. She did not work. She helped me with the church plan
awesome.
At the time. And at the time, also to raise a family. I think that's my biggest concern is our family. That she was able to really invest in the lives of in the early beginnings, and to invest in the lives of our children, right? To give that encouragement and the support that they ultimately need. Now that we're older as a church, she does not need to do as much in terms of the hands-on, I got to do all that, but she still does. She still helps at our second site to do the children's ministry there, right? On hands-on, to do all that she can. But I think what she did is to establish a witness for our other pastors' wives about there's no expectation of a summoning, you got to do this and you got to do all that you could just be you, right? And my wife now is a principal at an elementary school. And she's pursuing her career. Now I could retire, now she became principal. I don't need to do this anymore. I can live the good life. But that's where I support her now. It's her new role, right? She's a principal. She's making an impact in her school, and she's a witness. They know that she's a believer because she's married to the board member who's a pastor, right? And yet she is now growing in that way. And she's really, really living out her faith. And so I believe that she's able to establish a role model for our wife, my pastoral staff wives, who are also working, who are absolutely young. My director, his wife is 23. Well, not wife, fiance. They're going to get married next month. 23. The other wife she's 33, and she's a nurse, full-time nurse. And so how do you learn? How do you balance family and ministry and support your husband? And I think my wife does a great job of modeling that for these ladies before the church. And not only for the ladies, but even for the ladies at our church. She's involved in community groups. She's involved with our missionary and a Bible study group. She does all that she can in that way.
How do you guys make sure your marriage is healthy? Because as you know, ministry can get very busy and you get pulled here and there. She's working too, so they know there's a lot going on. What are some things you guys have in place to make sure that you as a husband and as a wife, mother and father are healthy and still building that relationship?
It's spending time with each other, right? And that's what it is every day talking about life, talking about the kids, talking about work, talking about mutual things, and learning to find things that you enjoy together. I'm going to be an empty nester in 3 years. And one of the things that people always suggest is, what do you find in common? So often it was always about the kids. That's your commonality. But once that's gone, then what do you have in common? So my wife and I, we are discovering the things that we enjoy together, like eating. We love to eat, right? We love to watch Korean videos together, Korean drama on Netflix, and other things that we love to do. But because I'm a board member, I think it's been great that we're able to speak about education, right? Something that she's passionate about. And I think that's very helpful because I'm able to understand, because I'm in that world with her, and able to dialogue and talk about these things. And so really finding that time to really talk and to engage and to really understand each other. We're still growing. We still fight like nobody else, right? She's strong-headed, I'm strong-headed. But yet it's learning to enjoy each other and to get away. And so that's another big thing. And so when I'm talking about your friendships, right, about this brotherhood, right, the brotherhood even gets stronger when you're invited into their family lives. So the brotherhood that I have is just not that I'm just friends with the guys, but our wives are friends, our kids are friends, and we're friends. It's like, because they invite you into their life. It's not just like, just here's my part of my life I'm going to invite you into. No, we're all engaged in this together. Like, we get together as families, laughing and just doing nonsense together in that way. So I think that's why I choose for my wife, so that they could see us too as couples, right? So they see, if they see any concerns, they can speak into our lives saying, hey, what's going on with you guys? So that if they see anything, I know that they will speak and say, hey, we're concerned about you guys as well. So that's another huge aspect, is to have the accountability amongst friends who can see you guys operating as a couple and say, hey, we're concerned. I think that's a huge factor too.
That's so good. I totally believe in that.
Yeah.
And again, that's another thing that's different from the way we saw our KMOX on it.
Yes.
We never saw that. And it was a very different time. So I think as pastors, Korean American pastors, we have to be extra careful with our marriages because we didn't have that growing up, seeing that example, things like that.
Well, for me, I was kind of lucky though. I did see that example a little bit. And I saw that with the KCM, the OG guys, like the James Lee, the Park Young Bin, Joshua, those guys, they were very close. They actually started a church network together called New Life Mission Church, right? Those 5 guys.
This is the New Life that Will Chang is a part of?
Yes.
Wow, I did not know that. They started that. Oh my goodness.
James Lee,
I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. So James Lee, Park Young Bin, Joshua, they all started New Life Mission Church Network, and David Chong. So there are 5 guys. And these 5 guys all did KCM together. That's the thing. And they began this New Life. So they had New Life Northern Cal, New Life Denver, New Life Buena Park, New Life Fullerton, and New Life San Diego. That's how these guys started to get, they were the closest of friends. And that's the thing. Like their wives are friends. They're a big family. So I saw that growing up. So that spoke into my life as well. And that's why you have the New Life churches. And that's kind of what really birthed a lot of the second generation Reform guys. That network, those pastors who really spoke into our lives.
Man, that's such good history right there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You're an EM pastor. You're on the school board. You got a strong brotherhood. You're a former AWANA game commander.
Best part.
Tell me, how do you have time to look this good? You're so fit. You're so fit. Are you working out every day? Exercising every day?
I do. Every 5 days a week.
5 days a week.
5 days a week. So my thing is to keep healthy, keep healthy. And so now you can keep this on whether or not if you want to, but I just had a GI done recently. And so what happened was, before the GI, the prep, they say that's the hardest part where you got to do that detox where you got to just poo everything out. That was the best thing I ever did. I felt so good after. I felt clean. I felt, wow, energetic, just washed myself through. So my thing is that the stress of ministry is still the same as you get, continue on. But the thing what changes is you'll get older and it just gets harder, right? You don't have the same energy. You don't have the same oomph, I guess you could say the thing. That's what you need, right? And that's the thing. And so my thing is that you have to grow in the gospel, right? Every day. Every day, you got to constantly enjoy and learn and grow. At the same time, physically, grow and take care of yourself. It's just ministering to yourself on a regular basis, And that's why you increase that longevity in ministry. If you're not healthy physically, it's going to take a drain on your ministry. If you're not healthy spiritually, forget it. You're done, right? These things need to go hand in hand as you continue on in your ministry itself.
Well, I'm a huge gym rat. I'm getting back into it now because I got shoulder surgery.
Yes, there you go.
But one of these days, you and I, we're going to clang and bang the weights.
There we go. We got to do it. We got to do it for sure. I like that clang and bang for sure. Yes.